December 17, 1944. Early morning in Honsfeld, Belgium. The engine of a German Tiger tank sputtered, coughed, and went silent. SS officer Joachim Peiper hit the metal hatch in frustration as his driver tried again and again to start the massive Maybach engine. Nothing happened. The fuel gauge sat at 0. Even the reserve tank was dry. Peiper climbed down, his boots crunching the frozen ground. Around him stretched one of Germany's most powerful armor formations, 67 tanks, 149 half-tracks, and nearly 5,000 Waffen-SS soldiers, all stranded without fuel. This was the spearhead of Hitler's last major gamble, the Ardennes offensive, known as Operation Watch on the Rhine. Through the cold morning mist, Peiper could see the small Belgian village of Hansfeld ahead. It had been an American supply post for the 99th Infantry Division, but the Americans had retreated so fast that they'd left everything behind. Fire still burning in barrels, half-finished coffee cups, and most importantly, rows upon rows of fuel cans. Thousands of them. Peiper and his men moved quickly. His aide, Hans Gruner, opened one can and took a sniff. It was American high-octane gasoline. Within minutes, the troops began refueling their tanks. Peiper walked among the stockpiles, counting in disbelief. There was enough fuel, about 50,000 gallons, to power his entire armor group all the way to the Meuse River. It was a miraculous find, enough to possibly change the course of their mission. But as he watched his men pouring American fuel into German tanks, a grim thought struck him. If the Americans could afford to abandon such a massive supply, what did that say about the balance of power? Germany was fighting over every drop of fuel, while the Allies could leave thousands of gallons behind without a second thought. The war, he realized, was already lost. Germany hadn't just misjudged its enemy. It had completely misunderstood the scale of American power. 6 months earlier, in June 1944, Albert Speer, Hitler's Minister of Armaments, had presented a report that should have ended any hope of launching new offensives. Allied bombings had destroyed much of Germany's synthetic fuel production. The Luno Works, once producing 175,000 tons of fuel per month, was down to just 5,000 by September. Other hydrogenation plants across the country were running at less than 10% of capacity. The math was hopeless. In 1944, the United States produced about 1.8 billion barrels of crude oil. Germany, even counting synthetic and captured sources, produced just 33 million, barely 2% of America's total. The Reich was trying to fight a modern mechanized war with horse-drawn wagons. Major Friedrich Zimmermann from the German Logistics Command had warned that the Ardennes offensive would need at least 4.5 million gallons of fuel to reach Antwerp. Hitler promised 5 million, but only half ever reached the front due to transport failures. The entire operation relied on capturing Allied fuel, a desperate strategy that exposed Germany's growing weakness. Meanwhile, the Americans had built an astonishing supply system. They laid fuel pipelines under the English Channel, known as Pluto, Pipeline Under the Ocean, and ran the Red Ball Express, a vast convoy network delivering over 12,000 tons of supplies each day to the front. By December 1944, U.S. forces in Europe were using 1.2 million gallons of fuel daily, and still receiving more than they needed. Peiper, just 29 years old, was one of the youngest regimental commanders in the Waffen-SS. Decorated with the Knight's Cross and a veteran of the brutal Eastern Front, he knew one hard truth. In modern warfare, fuel wasn't just power, it was survival. Joachim Peiper's combat group had been chosen as the Schwerpunkt, the decisive strike point of Germany's entire Ardennes offensive. On December 14, 1944, 2 days before the attack began, Peiper attended the final briefing at Tondorf. General Sepp Dietrich, commander of the 6th SS Panzer Army, didn't sugarcoat the situation. You'll have enough fuel to reach the Meuse if you capture American supplies. Peiper's unit was allotted just 31,000 gallons of fuel, barely enough for 50 miles of combat movement. The Meuse River lay 65 miles away. From the start, the plan carried the seeds of failure. When Peiper's column began its push on December 16th, he issued strict orders to conserve every drop. Tanks were to travel in single file. Engines must be turned off during any halt longer than 5 minutes. And above all, capturing American fuel dumps was priority one. even higher than tactical objectives. Meanwhile, the contrast on the Allied side couldn't have been greater. That same morning, Captain James Rose of the U.S. 743rd Tank Battalion, just 20 miles from Peiper's starting point, wrote in his diary, received fuel resupply, 8,000 gallons, third delivery this week. Storage tanks already full. At 5:30 a.m., the German artillery barrage at open operation, Watch on the Rhine, thundered across the front, using more ammunition in 2 hours than the Wehrmacht once budgeted for entire campaigns. But the impressive firepower hid an ugly truth. Supplies were dangerously short. Peiper's column rolled out at 7 a.m., already behind schedule. The highways on their maps turned out to be narrow, muddy farm roads twisting through the dense Ardennes forest. Within hours, traffic jams formed as tanks and half-tracks built for the Russian steppes bogged down in the winter terrain. At Lanzerath, their first target, Peiper ran into surprise, an American reconnaissance platoon of just 18 men. Somehow, that tiny unit held up Germany's most powerful armored column for nearly 10 hours. During the standoff, Peiper's vehicles sat idling, burning through their limited fuel. When they finally broke through and reached Honsfeld at dawn on December 17th, they had traveled only 20 miles and used 40% of their fuel. At that pace, they wouldn't even make it halfway to the Meuse. The Hansfeld supply post wasn't even a major base, just a forward refueling point for the U.S. 99th Infantry Division. Yet, what Peiper found there was staggering. His aide, Hans Gruner, later recalled pyramids of jerry cans, each 5 gallons, stacked 3 meters high for hundreds of meters. The Americans hadn't even bothered to destroy them before retreating. The captured fuel turned out to be aviation-grade gasoline, high octane, mixed with motor fuel of 80 octane or higher. German engines were built for 74 octane, so the superior American gas was actually too strong, causing some tanks to misfire. As Peiper's men refueled, they uncovered more evidence of America's logistical power. Sergeant Wilhelm Hoffman, who spoke English from his pre-war import business, found shipping manifests in the depot office. They showed that this fuel had started in Texas, moved in New York, crossed the Atlantic to Liverpool, then to Normandy, and finally trucked 400 miles to Hansfeld, all in under 6 weeks. I showed the papers of Peiper, Hoffman recalled in a 1976 interview. He read them twice, then crushed them in his hand. He didn't say a word, but his face turned pale. We both knew exactly what it meant. Another soldier, Private Ernst Kara, discovered a stack of Stars and Stripes newspapers dated just 2 days earlier, December 15th. The headline announced the opening of a new Allied fuel pipeline from Cherbourg to Verdun, capable of delivering 300,000 gallons per day. That single pipeline could move more fuel in one day than Peiper's entire armor group would use in the whole offensive. To grasp the full impact of what Peiper saw in Hansfeld, one must first understand how desperate Germany's fuel situation had become by late 1944. By mid-1944, Germany's fuel crisis had reached its breaking point. Since May, Allied bombing had wiped out nearly 90% of the country's synthetic fuel production. The Luftwaffe was grounding aircraft because there simply wasn't enough aviation fuel to keep them flying. Pilot training hours had been slashed from 250 hours before the war to barely 60. The German Navy's surface ships were stuck in port, and even submarines had to use snorkels to stretch their diesel by running on battery power longer. At home, gasoline had become so rare that ordinary Germans hadn't seen private cars on the road since 1942. The Gestapo investigated thefts of single liters of fuel, and farmers were going back to using horses to plow their fields. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, America was producing 2/3 of the world's oil. The East Texas oil field alone generated more petroleum than all of German-occupied Europe combined. U.S. refineries were operating at such high capacity that companies like Standard Oil were experimenting with new uses for surplus crude simply because they had too much of it. With the 50,000 gallons captured at Hansfeld, Peiper's forces pushed ahead. By noon on December 17th, they reached Bulge, seizing additional rations, ammunition, and, most valuable of all, maps showing locations of nearby American fuel depots. But those maps also revealed a discouraging truth. The Americans had fuel everywhere. Every major crossroads had a depot, and the U.S. First Army alone had over 3.5 million gallons in reserve. Peiper's advance continued toward Lignaville, where his men would soon commit the infamous Malmedy massacre, killing 84 American prisoners. A decision Peiper later claimed was driven partly by fuel desperation, saying he didn't have the gasoline to transport captives. By evening, his lead tanks reached Stavelot, where an enormous American fuel depot stored more than 2 million gallons, enough to guarantee his advance to the Meuse. But it was already too late. Captain John Brewster and his team from the U.S. 291st Engineer Combat Battalion had received word of the German approach. Their orders were clear: deny the enemy fuel at all costs. The depot covered 15 acres, stacked with 2,189,000 gallons of gasoline in neat rows of jerry cans. At 4:30 p.m., as Peiper's column closed in, Brewster gave the order. His engineers poured trails of gasoline between the stacks and distributed white phosphorus grenades. Technical Sergeant Paul Solis threw the first one. The explosion was immediate and massive, he later recalled. A wall of fire shot up at least 100 feet. Within minutes, the entire depot was an inferno. When Peiper's tanks arrived, a massive column of black smoke was rising 1,000 feet into the air. The fire burned for 3 days, consuming enough fuel to power Peiper's entire division to Antwerp and back. His driver later remembered. Peiper stood on the tank turret, watching the flames. He didn't speak for several minutes. Then he climbed down and said quietly, "They can afford to burn 2 million gallons just to keep it from us. What are we doing here?" Across the Ardennes, American engineers were doing the same, destroying fuel depots rather than letting them fall into enemy hands. At Troisponts, 1.1 million gallons were burned. At Spa, 2.5 million. In the first week alone, over 8 million gallons were deliberately destroyed, more fuel than Germany had allocated for the entire offensive. This staggering act of supply discipline was possible only because of a logistical network that Germany couldn't even imagine. The Red Ball Express, a fleet of 6,000 trucks running day and night, had already delivered 412,000 tons of supplies to the front. Each truck burned about 40 gallons daily, meaning the operation itself consumed more fuel than an entire German army group received in a month. By December 1944, the U.S. Motor Transport Service had 230 truck companies running on color-coded routes, delivering 20,000 tons of supplies every day, including 3,000 tons of fuel. Colonel James Snyder, Chief Logistics Officer for the U.S. First Army, recorded in his log on December 18th. Fuel received, 1,847,000 gallons. Fuel issued, 1,623,000 gallons. Net gain to reserves, 224,000 gallons. And behind those trucks came something even more advanced, the pipeline system. Under Operation Pluto, engineers had laid fuel lines across the English Channel, pumping 1 million gallons a day from Britain Strait into continental Europe. A vast network of Allied fuel pipelines now stretched deep across France and into Belgium. The Cherbourg Paris line pumped 800,000 gallons each day, while the Seine line added another 650,000. By December 1944, Allied forces in northwest Europe were burning through 7.5 million gallons of fuel every day, yet still receiving over 8.2 million. Even in the middle of a massive offensive, they were building up reserves faster than they could use them. As Peiper's column pushed deeper into Belgium on December 18th, the hopelessness of Germany's position became painfully clear. At Stumont, his men captured yet another small depot, but the fuel vanished almost immediately. 5,000 gallons gone in just 3 hours of combat. The mighty Tiger tanks devoured 2.5 gallons per mile, while the Panther tanks used around 1.5. In the rough, hilly Ardennes terrain, those numbers jumped by nearly 40%. Otto Dingler, the maintenance officer of the 1st SS Panzer Regiment, later wrote, "By noon on December 18th, we had burned through 67,000 gallons since the offensive began. We had captured maybe 55,000. We were running at a loss." The Americans knew all of this. Thanks to intercepted German radio traffic through ultra-intelligence, General Courtney Hodges issued new orders. Enemy critically short of fuel. Destroy all gasoline stocks threatened by capture. That same day, American C-47 transport planes completed 316 flights into the besieged town of Bastogne, dropping supplies, including 160,000 gallons of fuel. The Americans were airdropping more gasoline to one surrounded garrison than Peiper's entire armored group possessed. By December 19th, Peiper's units were fighting near Stillmont with almost nothing left in their tanks. Vehicles were being abandoned, not because they'd been hit, but because their fuel had run dry. Peiper pooled what little remained, perhaps 8,000 gallons, enough for one more battle or retreat, but not both. While his men struggled to move, Allied planners were already looking ahead to January. Brigadier General Morris Gillen requested 245 million gallons for upcoming operations. The request was approved instantly, without debate. The differences didn't end with supply totals. They extended the design. American equipment was standardized and efficient. Sherman tanks averaged 0.8 gallons per mile, while the heavier German Tigers burned more than triple that. U.S. trucks could run 8 miles on a gallon, even fully loaded. Parts were interchangeable, and maintenance was simple. German forces, on the other hand, operated a confusing mix of vehicles. Captured French and Soviet machines mixed with German models, each requiring different fuels, oils, and spare parts. Every difference added another layer of logistical chaos. Then came the final blow. On December 20th, Peiper received a radio message. Fuel convoy destroyed by Allied aircraft. No resupply possible. Continue with available resources. He gathered his officers. SS Sturmbannführer Werner Potschke spoke plainly. We have fuel for maybe 20 kilometers. The Meuse is 30 away. According to Aide Hans Gruner's later account, Peiper responded quietly. Gentlemen, we have learned the truth. We are fighting an enemy who burns more fuel to deny it to us than we receive for this entire campaign. What seemed a miracle at Hansfeld was nothing to them. We cannot win. This realization spread to the German ranks. General Otto von Manschenfeld, commander of the 5th Panzer Army, later wrote, When I learned the Americans had destroyed 8 million gallons of fuel rather than risk capture, I knew our offensive had already failed. Colonel Friedrich von der Heydt, captured on December 23rd, told his interrogators, Your soldiers throw away chocolate. My men haven't tasted it in 2 years. You burn millions of gallons of fuel. We measure it by the liter. How can we fight such abundance? By December 21st, Peiper and his men were surrounded near Laglis. Their tanks stood silent out of fuel as American forces closed in. The 31st Infantry Division, the 82nd Airborne, and the 3rd Armored Division, each with combined daily fuel allocation of over 340,000 gallons for that single day alone. By December 21st, 1944, Joachim Peiper's armor group had barely 1,000 gallons of fuel left. The once mighty spearhead of the Ardennes offensive was now surrounded, its engines silent. Private First Class Richard McKinney, an American soldier nearby, wrote home, We got Germans trapped who ran out of gas. Our captain joked that we use more fuel heating coffee than they have left for tanks. That simple joke captured the scale of industrial warfare at its peak. When General Patton's Third Army pivoted north to relieve Bastogne, the move required 350,000 gallons of fuel, just for redeployment. For the Germans, such a maneuver would have been impossible. The Americans did it in 3 days. On December 23rd, clear skies returned, and Allied air power roared back into action. More than 2,000 sorties took off that day. Each P-47 Thunderbolt fighter burned around 300 gallons an hour. Each B-26 bomber used 200 gallons hourly. In a single day, Allied aircraft consumed more fuel than the entire German offensive had been allocated. That night, between December 23rd and 24th, Peiper gave the order to abandon all vehicles and escape on foot. Of the 119 tanks and assault guns that began the campaign, only 39 were still functional, but none had fuel. The remaining tanks were destroyed, using what ammunition was left. Oberreiter Heinz Scholz later described it. We drained the last of fuel from every vehicle, maybe 200 gallons total. The Obersturmbannführer personally set fire to his command tank. Millions of Reichsmarks of equipment lost, not to battle, but to empty fuel tanks. Out of 5,000 men who had marched with Kampfgruppe Peiper, roughly 770 made it back. They had advanced 60 miles, captured several depots, and learned a brutal truth about the scale of Allied logistics. Word of Peiper's experience spread fast. On December 26, Field Marshal Walter Model read reports of captured and destroyed American fuel stores. 50,000 gallons seized at Honsfeld, 2 million burned at Stavelot, and 8 million destroyed elsewhere. His chief of staff noted that Model reread the numbers twice before muttering, "We are not fighting the same war." When Albert Speer showed these reports to Hitler 2 days later, Hitler refused to believe them. He dismissed the figures as Allied propaganda and claimed the photos of the burning Stavelot depot were Hollywood fabrications. But among officers and soldiers, the truth was clear. Sergeant Wilhelm Hoffman wrote home to his wife, "The Americans destroy more fuel in a day than we receive in a month. They drive tanks like we march. This war is lost." The fuel crisis was just one symptom of a far greater reality. By 1944, the United States was producing half of the world's total manufactured goods. American factories turned out one new aircraft every 5 minutes, a ship every day, and a tank every 7 minutes. Petroleum numbers told the same story. Asterisk United States, asterisk 1.8 billion barrels. Asterisk Soviet Union, asterisk 110 million barrels. Asterisk Germany, including synthetic 33 million barrels. Asterisk Japan, asterisk 2.6 million barrels. Together, the entire Axis produced less than 2% of America's oil output. Every German offensive after 1942 was constrained by fuel shortages. Every American offensive was fueled by an abundance Germany could not comprehend. On December 27th, U.S. Lieutenant Colonel Chester Hansen recorded a small logistical issue. Bad weather had slowed fuel deliveries to only 500,000 gallons per day. Officers were briefly concerned, until someone pointed out that this figure exceeded the total fuel allocated to the entire German offensive. Captured German soldiers from the Ardennes campaign were less shaken by American firepower than by American excess. Seeing GIs toss away half-eaten rations or pour gasoline into stoves for heat broke their morale. One prisoner, Gustav Reichelt, told interrogators, "We knew your production numbers in theory, but seeing soldiers waste what we could never have made it real. Every German who witnessed your abundance knew the war was finished." Letters home confirmed the despair. Corporal Ernst Muller wrote, "Americans wash their clothes in gasoline. They give chocolate to dogs. They fire artillery for Christmas. We cannot fight infinity." The psychological blow was devastating. The myth of German superiority collapsed under the sheer weight of Allied production. How could a nation calling itself a master race be starving for oil while its enemies had so much they could burn it away? During the Nuremberg trials, many German commanders would later admit that logistics, not tactics, had sealed their fate. Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel testified, "We had operational superiority in 1940 and 1941. By 1944, we couldn't even move divisions for lack of fuel, while the Americans shifted entire armies like chess pieces." When Peiper himself testified about the Malmedy massacre, his words offered a grim summary of what the entire German war machine had learned too late. After December 17, 1944, every German decision on the Western Front revolved around one problem: fuel. The shortage dictated everything. They couldn't maneuver, pursue, or even retreat effectively. The Americans, meanwhile, moved freely while German officers rationed every leader. General Heinz Uderian summed it up best. When Peiper captured 50,000 gallons, everything to him but nothing to the Americans, the war was already over. That moment in the Ardennes marked more than just a battlefield loss. It symbolized the end of an era. The age of heroic warfare had given way to the age of industrial warfare, where wars were won not by bravery, but by production capacity. Historian Richard Overy later calculated that by 1944, Allied industrial output outmatched the Axis by more than 5-1 in nearly every category. In petroleum, the gap was closer to 50-1. Numbers like that erased any advantage in training or tactics. The United States produced 3 750 aircraft during the war. Germany built 119, 971. America manufactured 88 for 10 tanks. Germany just 46, 857. Most decisive of all, the U.S. refined 1.8 billion barrels of oil in 1944 alone, while Germany scraped together only 33 million. On December 24th, as Peiper's men slipped away through the snow, they left behind 39 tanks, 70 half-tracks, and 177 other vehicles, abandoned for lack of fuel. The numbers told the entire story. They had captured 50,000 gallons at Honsfeld, which had felt like a miracle. Yet by comparison, that amount was meaningless to an enemy that could afford to burn millions. Peiper's driver reflected in 1975. That morning at Hansfeld, we celebrated like we'd won the lottery. But that night, when we heard about Stavelot burning, we understood we'd already lost. The Americans had so much fuel they could destroy what we would have died to keep. That miraculous 50,000 gallons was less than one American armored division used in 2 days, and less than what the Red Ball Express burned in 3 hours. It was, as one historian later said, a rounding error in the Allied daily fuel total. Major General J. Lawton Collins would later write, "The Germans' desperate hunt for fuel revealed their fundamental miscalculation. They assumed we valued gasoline the way they did, as something irreplaceable. They couldn't understand that we had so much, we could destroy millions of gallons just to avoid giving up an inch of ground. Operation Watch on the Rhine didn't fail because of courage or weather. It failed because of math. The German offensive consumed about 2.8 million gallons of fuel, nearly 40% of all they had. During that same time, American forces used 267 million gallons, almost 100 times more. The Wehrmacht lost 100,000 men, 800 tanks, and 1,000 aircraft. But its greatest loss was a shattering of illusion. Every German who saw the scale of Allied resources understood they weren't fighting a war anymore. They were witnessing their nation's slow execution. Joachim Peiper survived the war, but was imprisoned for war crimes until 1956. On July 14, 1976, he was killed at his home in France by unknown attackers. Years earlier, in a 1967 interview, he'd told historian Henry Lehman, "Finding that depot was the worst thing that ever happened to me. If we'd run out sooner, we could have retreated with dignity. Instead, we discovered the truth. Americans had oceans while we had drops. We discovered impossibility." The lesson Peiper learned in that frozen winter went far beyond one battle. Industrial warfare had changed everything. Logistics now outweighed tactics. Production overpowered courage. Abundance crushed dedication. The German soldier of 1944 may have been better trained and more battle-hardened. But it didn't matter. He was fighting a nation backed by factories that could waste more than Germany could produce. That truth was written in every jerrycan at Hansfeld, every burning gallon at Stavelot, and every steel pipeline running across France. From that point on, wars between industrial powers will be decided not by generals or strategies, but by factories, refineries, and assembly lines. Military analyst Colonel Trevor Dupuy later calculated that, in December 1944, each American soldier was supplied with roughly 67 pounds of material every day. Each German soldier received just 3. Americans complained about waste. Germans could only dream of such excess. In 1984, 40 years after battle, veterans from both sides returned to Loglise. Inside the small museum stands Peiper's Tiger tank, still resting in the spot where it finally stopped, its massive cannon lowered, its fuel tank empty. The date on the plaque reads, December 23, 1944. Former Untersturmführer Karl Wertmann stood next to the rusting Tiger tank at Loglise, beside former U.S. Staff Sergeant Roy Anderson of the 30th Infantry Division. Anderson looked at the massive vehicle and said quietly, "We always wondered why you stopped. We thought it was tactical." Wertmann gave a tired laugh. "We stopped because our tanks were empty," he said. You burn millions of gallons just to keep them from us. How could we fight that? Anderson was silent for a moment, then replied, We never knew you were that short. We had so much, we never even thought about it. That short exchange summed up the entire truth of December 1944. One side measured fuel by the gallon, the other by the million. One side fought desperately for every jerry can. The other burned oceans of gasoline without hesitation. The outcome had been decided long before the first shot was fired. German records confirm it with chilling precision. From the War Diary of Army Group B, December 16 offensive begins. Fuel at 70% of the minimum requirement. December 17 Peiper captures 50,000 gallons. December 18 multiple American depots destroyed. Over 5 million gallons lost. December 19 fuel situation critical. Several units immobilized. December 24 Peiper abandons vehicles. Total exhaustion of fuel. The U.S. First Army's reports for the same period tell the opposite story. December 16 fuel reserves. 3.7 million gallons. December 17 2.2 million gallons destroyed by choice. December 18 1.8 million gallons newly delivered. December 24 reserves for 0.1 million gallons. While the Germans rationed every liter, the Americans treated millions as disposable. But the gap wasn't just in quantity, it was in technology. American refineries had perfected catalytic cracking, a process that produced higher octane fuel far more efficiently than Germany's synthetic hydrogenation methods. U.S. aircraft ran on 100-octane aviation gasoline, giving them superior performance to German planes running on 87-octane synthetic fuel. American chemists also developed advanced additives, tetraethyl lead, ethylene dibromide, and detergent compounds that the Germans couldn't reproduce. Ironically, the quality difference was so great that many German engines performed worse on captured American fuel, which was too powerful for machines designed for lower-octane gasoline. Fuel shortages shaped every part of the German soldiers' experience. Private Hans Muller wrote on December 20th, Marched 30 kilometers. No fuel for trucks. We passed abandoned American vehicles with engines still running for warmth. They leave engines running. We march through snow. The consequences went beyond the front lines. Medical services collapsed. Ambulances couldn't evacuate the wounded. Field hospitals couldn't power generators. Men who could have been saved died, waiting for a transport that never came. Dr. Wilhelm Kirsting, an Army surgeon, later testified, We had skilled doctors, captured American medical supplies, everything, but no fuel for ambulances. Men died who could have been saved with a 10-kilometer ride. The reality shattered years of German propaganda. Soldiers who had been told Americans were soft and incapable now saw a nation so wealthy it could destroy what Germany fought to preserve. Joseph Goebbels noted the change in his diary on December 28th. Reports indicate serious morale problems. Soldiers are writing home about American superiority. Our narrative is collapsing. And indeed it did. Stories of American abundance spread faster than censors could contain them. The myth of German invincibility, the idea of a disciplined, unstoppable master race, could not survive direct contact with American logistics. The failure of the Ardennes offensive left Germany with no path forward except desperate defense. At the Nuremberg trials, General Alfred Jodl admitted, After the Ardennes, we knew it was over. We had played our last card and discovered the enemy held all the aces. The Allies understood this too and focused their attacks where it hurt most. Fuel. By February 1945, Germany's petroleum production had collapsed completely. The Luftwaffe was grounded. Flight training was canceled, and the once feared Wehrmacht became a static force, destroyed piece by faster, fuel-rich armies. As spring came, the end turned surreal. Entire German formations surrendered not after fierce battles, but because they couldn't move. General Major Fritz Bohlen later described it. We had 42 working tanks, trained crews, and full ammunition, but we had only 300 liters of fuel, barely enough to reach the next town. We destroyed our tanks and walked to captivity. Across the lines, the American advance was slowed only by traffic jams caused by too many vehicles. Patton's Third Army alone fielded 15,000 of them. Kampfgruppe's fuel crisis stood as proof that industrial capacity, not tactics, decided the outcome of World War II. That cold December morning in Honsfeld, when Peiper stood among captured American jerry cans, he had glimpsed the truth. They were fighting an enemy whose waste exceeded their need. The numbers tell the story better than any memoir. Asterisk German total fuel for the offensive, 5 million gallons. Asterisk fuel the Americans deliberately destroyed, 8 million gallons. Asterisk U.S. daily fuel consumption, 7.5 million gallons. Asterisk fuel Peiper capture at Hansfeld, 50,000 gallons, just 0.6% of America's daily use. The Battle of the Bulge cost roughly 19,000 American lives and as many as 100,000 German ones. It shattered the Wehrmacht's last reserves, but its deeper legacy was psychological. Through Peiper's discovery, German soldiers learned a truth they could scarcely believe. The United States possessed an abundance that defied comprehension. What Peiper found in Hansfeld wasn't just fuel, it was the essence of industrial warfare. Victory now belonged to whoever could produce the most petroleum, steel, and aluminum. In that contest, Germany had never stood a chance. After the battle, American salvage crews cataloging the battlefield at logistical found 39 fully functional Tiger and Panther tanks, all abandoned for one reason: empty fuel tanks. Major Robert Harrison's report noted, fuel required, 8,000 gallons. Classification, minimal. Source, local reserve. Time required, for hours. For the Americans, that amount was nothing, an errand easily handled with local supplies. For the Germans, it had been an impossible dream. 8,000 gallons could have saved their most advanced tanks. For the Allies, it wasn't even worth recording. That was Peiper's ultimate discovery at Hansfeld. Not merely that the Americans had more fuel, but that their abundance existed on such a massive scale that German scarcity no longer mattered. The war had been lost long before that winter morning. Once American industrial might was fully mobilized, the outcome was inevitable. Hansfeld had only revealed what had been true since 1942. Germany was fighting the impossible, measuring defeat in gallons, while America measured victory in oceans. Today, Peiper's Tiger tank still stands in a museum at logistical, its fuel gauge forever empty, a silent monument to the moment when tactical brilliance met logistical reality and lost. Visitors often ask why such powerful machines were abandoned. The answer remains simple and final: no fuel.